going to start this video by saying every dog has her day. But she would prefer me to use the expression, there's more than one way to skin a cat. We bring this up as an opportunity to, flex some theoretical muscles and see how we take some of these game concepts we've been talking about over the last few months on this channel, on Immersion Play, other channels, and see if we all come up with the same kind of conclusions, or mesh those conclusions together and see where they go. So imagine that you're going to prepare for a game. You know the players, you're comfortable with the game itself, you're comfortable with the setting. Let's also imagine that for the sake of experimentation, you decide to prepare for this game in two different ways. All right. Option A, option B. You're preparing for the same characters, you're preparing for the same players. You're preparing in the same setting. So what I mean by that is, let's say we have an innkeeper who is cutting corners by buying cheap meat. And let's say that people eat that meat, either get sick or they don't. Option A finds you preparing NPCs, locations, and agendas. You as the game master know about the bad meat, and you have set up a mechanic wherein the meat may or may not infect people. And you have an idea of how quickly this illness will spread through the fellow's customers, and you've given some thought at how people will react to this disease and how quickly, based on their actual stats, anybody who decides to investigate it would narrow things down to this inn. So meaning, when the contagion spreads far enough to be investigated, the investigator would take however long to track it back to the inn. All of this being not planned in advance, but being prepared for and thought about based on character stats. Meaning, the disease may not cause sickness in an interesting enough amount of the population. Nothing happens. It may not attract the attention of anyone who would investigate it. Or the opposite might happen. It might spread very rapidly, and a number of people interested in investigating it might start to do so at different rates based on their own ability. There's no plot or planned story structure here. There's an event. There are people. The people have motivations. Those motivations spark further events, which may or may not ever come up in play. That's option A. Option B. This option has the game master preparing, let's call them set pieces. And based on the plans of the players and their characters, the game master knows that the party is going to go to these places and prepares for something to be there when they get there. So when they arrive, something happens. When they get to the inn, they have an opportunity to notice the sickness in action. They have the ability to make some connections or not, or at least to be able to make them later. And then as the illness from the rotten meat spreads, as it will, they're able to interact with it if they choose and save the day for a nice dramatic conclusion. So option A has all of the same elements without any scripting. And option B has the same elements, but instead of random chance, a story framework is put in place for the players to take advantage of if they choose. Now, in neither one of these cases is there any railroading going on. All right, I want to make that clear in case it's not obvious. In option A, we have maybe what's often called the sandbox. There are plot elements which the group can choose to interact with or not, or story elements or campaign elements, or whatever you want to call them. There are items that exist and can be interacted with, which will be interacting on their own agendas according to their own abilities on their own timelines, not timelines chosen for dramatic purposes, but on timelines that make sense according to what those things are. Meaning, what we would think of as story is either created or not, depending on how things go in actual play. Meaning, you could run the exact same encounter multiple times with multiple people and have different outcomes from those exact same elements each time. Versus things which the group will encounter, which they will opt to interact with or not, which will turn into further story elements based on a timeline that makes sense according to the rules of a story, like a novel or a movie, that will build and build into more and more interesting situations until we reach a climax. The characters aren't forced to follow this road to climax, but of course are certainly free to follow it. And the outcome will be different each time that you run it based on how the group reacts and how successful the group is. But you will have a similar story structure each time. The details will change. So that's option A versus option B. Both free, both requiring planning in advance, both using completely different planning methods. So my question is, running this scenario, what would the effects be on the player group? What would the effects be on the game master? Thinking about everything that we've discussed, things like bleed, things like behavioral momentum, right? Even GNS, if you like. How do all of these things come together to shape an experience? Option A, option B being the framework for this discussion. How would the game feel different? How would the flow of the game differ? How would the game be described afterward in terms of its attributes? What would the takeaway experience be? When the game was finished, other than the obvious enjoyment, what would the players be taking away from the table that differs in option A and option B? And to be totally clear, what I'm asking is not which way is better, option A or option B, or which would have better results. It's just looking at what would the results be running the same game, which was planned in different methods for the same group, the same characters in the same setting. We're looking for how they are different. I really look forward to hearing what people have to say.